So I'm just brushing some puddles of PVA off my big rocks, and then I can do the next thing. I don't have to wait for it all to dry, which is nice. So what I've got is, this is called tear sheet. It might have other names, I'm not sure. But it's basically, it's like flock, but in a chunk instead of in granules. You can see it just in that tub there. So all I've done, so I was just cleaning up my rocks a bit there, and then I get this. It's called tear sheet because you tear pieces off it, and then there it is. Um, and you pull some off, or however much you want. I think that looks a bit small, that bit I got there. Get some PVA, you'll be surprised to hear, and just glue the stuff on wherever you want a bush. Okay, so I think I know what happened here. The end of my PVA bottle had dried up, because don't forget, days pass between me doing these things. So I think I dried. There we go, a little tiny blob. No need to go mad. Get that, stick it on. You can't see it very well in this video, but you'll see it in a bit from a different angle. I think you do anyway. So again, I don't plan this. I literally am making this up on the fly. I'm thinking, you could have one there, you could have one there. It's blending in right now. Don't worry about that. I always say that. I don't know how many times have I said that. This looks terrible, but don't worry. So yeah, I decided that bit was a bit too small and I put a bigger chunk on. Now this flock is a very similar color to the dark grass, which is why from this angle it's blending in, but from a lower angle, don't forget it's a big 3D shape, so it's stood up like a bit of a bush. So I'm not making great big bushes. These are literally just clumps to break up the monotony of all of the grass. And this is all wet through still, don't forget. So though I'm using some PVA to stick the bushes down, what that PVA I'm using will do is that'll soak in with all of the wet stuff it's got underneath it, and then the bush and the bits underneath become one, really. They really are quite robust, these things, when you've finished. The most fragile thing on there, ironically, is the rocks, because they're plaster of Paris. So you don't go mad. This is another thing. It's always tempting to just keep sticking more and more and more on. But real life doesn't tend to look like that. You don't have regularly spaced bushes everywhere. That's just no. Even in wild areas, which this particular piece I'm making is obviously a bit of a wild area. So what I'm getting now is a lighter color tear sheet, and I'm tearing a smaller amount off, and then what you'll see me do is stick it in. Sorry, it's a darker piece. It's kind of, it's the darker green, but it's sort of brighter in some way. Does that make sense? So I'm sticking this in with the other pieces of bush that I've put down, and the two-tone effect just makes it look more like a bush. It's hard to explain, but that's all that's happening here. I'm basically getting another color, shoving it in there just to add a little variety, and you'll see me do it probably to all of them. I don't want a one color bush anywhere. So yeah, I can't believe how much time I spent on this. God, my life's exciting, isn't it? I wonder if anyone's watching this who has never seen anything like this made before, and is either thinking, "Ooh, this is interesting. I've not seen this before," or is just thinking, "You muppet, what are you wasting all your time doing?" Uh, hmm. And like I say, I started building this with zero plan. That thing you see before you was not in my mind. I just started sticking polystyrene down and just went with it wherever it took me. And the river bit, I thought I would probably have some water in it, but I hadn't really thought about it. And then I ended up, just when I was sticking it down, I ended up with this um, obvious watery channel, and I just kind of developed it from there. So everything I'm doing up to this point is with an eye on what's coming next. Like painting all of that brown, you think, well, what was the point? Because you can't see it. But the reality is, when all that PVA dries and turns transparent, between little bits, and I mean tiny bits, you would have seen white, um, a white surface underneath from the sculptor mold. It's not exactly white, but you know. But so painting it brown means that on the edges of the rocks and between wherever you can see through, it looks right. It looks like dirt basically, and because all of this was going on top was why I was not super fussed about what color it was or how carefully I applied it. As long as it was covered, that was good enough for me. Um, yeah, so there you go. It's taken me quite a long time, and all I've ended up with is a tiny smattering of bushes. But but that's the whole point, really, is you just don't overdo it. It's so easy to get carried away and just keep sticking a bit here and sticking a bit there. So I've now got the bushes on, and I can't remember what I did. I know what I should do next. Yay! Go for the ISO. So spray it on the bushes, and then hands up, anyone who knows what's going to come after the ISO? Yep, watered down PVA. So spray some watered PVA on the. I'm soaking them with ISO because I really want the stuff to soak through, and that stuff makes it soak through. So again, oh come on PVA, you can see that's the frustration of this PVA that just refuses to spray. So there we go. I, what you can't see is I've turned to one side in my garage where there's a big piece of cardboard, and I've just sprayed like mad onto the cardboard until it came through. So, and then I just soak the any of the bushes. I don't really care where it goes, but any of the bush, as long as I get the bushes soaked in it, um, everything's wet through, including me, all my hands. That's another good thing about PVA. It's easy to wash off your hands or just let it dry a bit and rub it off. Um, and then I just need to let the whole thing dry, basically, yet again. Um, but that's okay. I just leave it at the end of my garage. So I got my phone off. It's on a little tiny tripod held on by an elastic band. So super technical. Just to give you a bit more of a different angle and a more of a close up. Oh, amazing camera work. So I've got a big daylight bulb above me. So if I get too close, I immediately throw my own shadow over everything. So it's all still wet through, but you see the sort of rock effect? Um, I'm not saying that rocks are yellow. It could have done with a bit more red in it, but I'm not unhappy with it. Um, all of that's just polystyrene. That's anything below the green is not the model. Does that make sense? So what I will probably do at the end is paint everything black around the edges that is not the model. So I'm not entirely sure what I'm filming there. Okay, that's dry. This could be a week later. I can't remember. Um, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do some highlights on things. Everything's glued down. None of that greenery is moving. Um, but I want to highlight the rocks a bit. So what I've got there is pure white acrylic. Again, cheap stuff. And I'm going to use a technique called dry brushing. If you've ever done any of this, you're just going, yeah, I know what dry brushing is, but obviously my channel is not a channel for making stuff, so a lot of people may not have any idea what I'm talking about. So dry brushing, I'm using that old t-shirt again. Really, I should have used a paper towel, but I didn't have one handy, and I'm too lazy to go out the garage and back into the house to get one. So a bit of white paint, and then you get your brush and you get some paint on it, like you do. But then you rub all the paint off it until your brush is dry, hence the term dry brushing. So it's just a little bit of dry paint on, and when you rub it across the surface of something, the paint catches only on the raised bits, on the very edges of things. So it's quite a subtle effect in that it highlights the edges of everything without accidentally painting them. So all I'm doing is whizzing it across the rocks, and a lot of people won't do this. I just like, this is a personal choice. I just like the effect. So, like I say, you've got to be careful because you put too much paint on your brush, you're gonna paint the thing white, obviously. So you put the paint on, you rub the paint off until all that's left on the brush is more or less dry paint. And this is another one of those things where less is more. You can always put a bit more on later, but you got to be subtle with this. This is the one that everything up to now I've been quite slapdash. I've just chucked it on, covered it in glue. This one is a technique. You want to practice. If you don't know how to do this, you want to practice on something you don't care about first. And it's not difficult, but it's a technique. So yeah, get some paint on your brush, rub it off, make sure your brush is practically dry, um, um, and go across any edges. You don't follow the edge because you're not painting it on. All you want it to do is the very edge of whatever you're painting is for that edge to drag some of the paint off your brush. I hope this is making sense. And then, so I'm being subtle. Some people would say I'm not being subtle enough, but this is kind of the effect I was after. So I'm happy with it. And then when I got into the riverbed, the bigger rocks I treated the same. So if you watch that, I mean, that rock is particularly dark at the back there. And you can see I'm just whizzing across it with the brush. This really picks out the textures in the rock and highlights them. That's basically what it's doing. At the end of this, I will put, I know it's a bit difficult on this video. It's filming my phone from a terrible angle with the tripod leg in the picture and everything. At the end, I will take some pictures and show you properly what we ended up with, but not yet. So in the riverbed, because I know what I'm going to do later, I'm highlighting it more heavily. I wanted more contrast between the highlights and the lowlights, if you like, between the shadows and the white bits. Doesn't mean I'm painting bits of it white. I'm still dry brushing it. I'm just going on a bit heavier because I know what's going to happen to the river Basically, I'm going to put a river in it. So you'll be looking through the water to see the riverbed. Um, and so you need something that will show up. So as you can see, it looks kind of white. But again, as I keep saying, don't worry about it. It will all get fixed at the end. So um, I'm not sure whether the phone camera here is picking it up realistically. I think I pick it up here to show you closer. I don't know what happened. I'm just winging it about. Oh, there we go. Yeah, I must have done. There you go. So you see the rocks, they look more like rocks just because of that bit of um, highlighting. There you go. And it's just plaster of Paris that you saw me paint all of those different weird shades onto. Uh, and then this is the end result. Um, it always gives me a nice feeling when I get to this point. So it is a riverbed. There's a few little bits of flock in there. I left them in on purpose because the bottom of a river has stuff in it. And like I say, I highlighted it more. Okay, so as you can see, there's like there's a stick in it. um, Ignore the stick. We'll come to the stick. But what you see, can you see that sort of square piece of white paper in the top left there that I'm pulling things off? Those are pre-made little what's the word I'm looking for? Clumps of long grass, if you like, little tiny bush things. They do have a name, that, and it's completely escaping me. Again, I bought them off eBay. I had them for years, just been hanging around, and they're basically self-adhesive little clumps, and they come in really handy for just adding some detail to the landscape. They come in all different colours. These ones are quite a bright green. As I will say a lot, ignore that stick. Just ignore it. Yes, it's a stick. We've all seen a stick. Okay, the stick. I found a stick and I broke a piece off because it had all of those little branches off it. And I thought, you know what? From a scale point of view, this just looks exactly like a dead tree. And it's literally a stick out of my garden that I just broke off and went, perfect, you'll do. And it was dead. And so it's dried out. I don't have to worry about sap coming out of it or anything like that. It was totally dead, and it'll do the job. So these little clump things, like I say, I've got them in different colours, and I'll be sticking them around. And all I'm doing is adding a bit more detail to the landscape. Again, as I said earlier, it's tempting to stick them everywhere and just go mad with the things. You just keep going, oh, I'll have another one there and I'll have another one there. But you've got to, at this stage, I'm looking at the thing as if it was a real place because it's now reached its sort of final design. So I'm thinking, well, where does stuff grow? And stuff tends to grow on the edge of rocks where it meets the soil, or on the edge of the water or whatever. I'm not, I'm no botanist, so I'm just going with where it seems right without going mad and sticking them all over the place. Obviously, if you haven't got any of these, don't worry about it. Just don't stick any on. There's no right or wrong here. There's just overdoing it. That's the biggest risk, is that you just overdo it and it just looks ridiculous. So Um, yeah, I think it's time to just move on. Okay, I do this all the time. I decided I wasn't happy with that riverbed. It's just a bit dull. So I got some bright. I just happen to have this stuff lying around like everything else. I got some fairly fine. It's almost certainly fish tank gravel, but it's very light in color. It's small and it's very light in color. Um, and I've just sprinkled some down the river. Um, just I was worried a bit about the riverbed just being all one grey. And it's not grey; it's actually brown with white highlights. But it, it, it was boring. There you go. I've all of that yellow I put in there, and all of the little blobs of green and everything. They just got lost along the way. So I just put a bit of gravel in to sort of brighten the place up a bit. Okay, and now the most exciting but most dangerous uh, bit. This is where I can utterly ruin the model. This stuff is polyester resin. I would not be using polyester resin if I hadn't run out of epoxy resin. Epoxy resin is amazing stuff. You buy water clear epoxy resin. You could do this in your house, no problem. This stuff is polyester resin, and I do not recommend it to anyone for anything. Okay, just to be clear, I just happen to have some left over from something, and I'd run out of epoxy resin because, like I said, I haven't done this stuff for a long time. So some of these things um, I've run out of, and I happen to have this at the back of my garage in amongst all of my fake rocks and fake grass and fake everything else. So the problem with polyester resin is it's styrene based. Well, it's ester based, isn't it? Yeah. So it's not good for you. It smells so bad for a very long time that you would not be able to stay in the same room as it. Don't worry about what my hands are doing on the screen here. I'll get to that. So I'm going to mix up some polyester resin. I'm going to pour it in my garage, and then I am immediately taking this model out and putting it in my shed for about a week because it stinks. Okay. So I'm going to pour it in where the river is. If I get this wrong, it's ruined. There's no going back from this. Now, I need to block up the end of the rivers to stop the stuff just running out. So what I have there is like a big lolly stick, whatever you want to call it. And I've stuck sticky tape onto it. And the reason for that is that the wood of that stick would stick to the polyester resin in a very permanent way. It would not, you would not be getting it back. Okay, so if I cover it in clear sticky tape, it's called sellotape in the UK, but it's just a brand name. The polyester resin doesn't stick to that. So if I hadn't have done that, this stick would be it would stick to the resin forever. I would end up having to sand it off. So this is a hot glue gun, and what you'll see is me putting what looks like, I'm guessing that's not hot enough yet. That's another thing. I'm terrible with hot glue guns. I switch them on, I want them to work instantly. So you will see me put a lot of glue on this because resin is a total escape artist. If there is the slightest gap, it will leak out. The stuff is amazing at escaping. So you'll see me put a lot of hot glue on here. If you've ever used hot glue, you know it's one, very hot, but two, it sets really quick. As soon as it's cold, it turns into plastic. So it's great stuff. It's resistant to the resin, I think. I'm pretty sure it is. In fact, I'm fairly certain it is. And it holds things really tightly. Oh, look at my glue sticks run out. I'll just wander off somewhere and get another one. But with resin, like I say, it's a total escape artist. You have to really, really glue this up. I don't know what was wrong with my glue gun. The It's just cheap glue. I probably got it from the pound shop like I buy everything else. It usually goes off really quickly, but this stuff took too long to cool down. It was taking like 2 minutes to set, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you try to do this sort of thing. So what I'm building is a dam at the end of the river. So just to hold the resin in while the resin sets, because the resin takes a while. The resin, you basically, with something like epoxy resin, it's probably a 50-50 mix. So if you've got 50 grams of A, you put in 50 grams of B, mix them together, ta-da, 100 grams of resin that's going to set. With polyester resin, it doesn't. It has a catalyst, and that just goes in at like 1, 2, or 3% of whatever the resin is. So the best thing to do, because it's very hard to measure 1 gram. So the best thing to do is go aim for 1%. You will invariably miss 1% and probably end up putting in 2%. And that still gives you a bit of leeway because you've got 1, 2, or 3%, depending on how fast you want that resin to go off. The problem with, you think, well, just dump a load of catalyst in then. Well, the problem is the reaction is exothermic, which means it basically generates heat. And if you put too much catalyst in and your resin is a bit thick, say it's like 2 inches deep, it can actually heat up to the point where it sets itself on fire. So, did I mention I don't recommend polyester resin under any circumstances? You can see this glue's not setting. Maybe it was hot in the garage. Whatever it was, the glue was taking too long. Like I say, like a whole 2 minutes. But this is the whole risky bit of doing this model. And do not do water effect. If anyone wants to build themselves something because they've watched this and then they go and watch Luke's APS and they think, yeah, I fancy having a go at that. Don't do a water feature on your first one, because once you get into resin stuff, one, it's bloody expensive, and two, it's fraught with danger. Do you remember me saying right back at the beginning? I'm sure you don't. But right back at the beginning, when I was putting the sculptor mold on over the polystyrene, I was saying I have to make sure I have not left any gaps. And the reason for that is that when I pour in the polyester resin, if that gets through to the polystyrene, it will just eat it. It will totally melt till it's gone, any polystyrene that it comes into contact with. So if it leaks through this model into the polystyrene underneath, it would eat all of the polystyrene would be gone from underneath, which would be a bad thing. Now, I don't think I caught it on camera. You can see that's gone white, so it's set nice and hard. I'm not sure if I caught it on the camera, but a little bit did leak through. Not at this barrier, but the other barrier, and it did eat the polystyrene underneath. Luckily, it must have been a tiny leak, and it didn't manage to eat too much. But yeah, there, underneath there, I ended up with a gap where it leaked slightly. But the stuff is amazing. If it finds a little tiny hole, it goes through. Right. Okay, let's get on to the dangerous stuff.